Do you ever wonder what it took to survive when a cheap dinner was all a family could afford? In the 1940s, African Americans turned scraps and garden greens into meals that kept them strong through hard times. Behind every pot was more than food. It was the will to keep going. Hoover stew was the meal that kept families fed when the pantry looked bare and the paychecks had stopped. It was a pot of survival, bubbling with whatever a family could gather, usually macaroni, canned tomatoes, and slices of hot dog that stretched further than anyone thought possible. Every house had its own version, passed along like a secret recipe of endurance. Sometimes it was soupy, sometimes thick enough to stand a spoon in, but always hearty. Mothers would stir the pot with tired hands, humming gospel songs as the smell of tomato and salt filled the room. The macaroni swelled, the hot dogs bobbed like little treasures, and children waited with bowls clutched tight. It was the taste of making do, of not giving up when cupboards were empty and spirits low. Hoover stew was more than a meal. It was proof that a little imagination could turn struggle into supper, and that warmth came as much from hope as it did from heat. Neck bone stew was the kind of food that demanded patience and rewarded love. Pork neck bones were cheap, meaty enough to flavor a pot, and rich enough to make even plain vegetables taste like a feast. Families would buy a handful from the butcher and let them simmer all afternoon with onions, celery, and carrots until the meat fell off the bone. The broth grew thick and smoky, the kind that clung to spoons and hearts alike. For many, this was the meal that marked Sundays, when everyone crowded into the kitchen, laughing and talking over the bubbling pot. It was not fancy, but it was full of pride. Neck bone stew turned hard times into comfort and hunger into gratitude. The smell alone could bring neighbors knocking, eager for a bowl. In every tender bite was the story of people who knew how to make flavor from scraps and strength from struggle. Cornmeal mush with gravy was the taste of endurance that outlived the Depression and followed people right into the war years. It began with cornmeal whisked into boiling water, stirred until it thickened into a golden, bubbling paste. Left to set, it became firm enough to slice, fry, or drown in homemade gravy. The texture was soft and filling, the flavor humble but satisfying. For those with little money and big families, it was a meal that stretched as far as it needed to. Mothers would fry slices in bacon grease when they could, or serve it plain with onion gravy made from drippings. The smell of it cooking was a reminder that simplicity did not mean lack. It was food that carried people through, one spoonful at a time. Cornmeal mush was living proof that survival could be seasoned with creativity, that dignity could sit right beside thrift on a dinner plate. Red beans and rice was a meal that brought comfort wherever you called home, but it meant something deeper in African American kitchens. It started cheap, just dried beans, salt pork, and a pot of rice. But what came out of that pot was rich in soul. The beans simmered slow, soaking up garlic, pepper, and every bit of seasoning a cook's hand could spare. The rice caught all that flavor, turning a poor man's supper into a dish fit for celebration. This was food that did more than fill bellies. It gathered people together, brought laughter back to weary faces, and reminded families that they still had each other. On Mondays, the smell drifted through New Orleans streets, through shotgun houses and backyards, calling everyone home. It was the kind of food that fed more than hunger. It fed memory, tradition, and pride. One pot, one flame, and one love. That was red beans and rice. Collard greens with ham hocks was a dinner that filled the whole house with warmth long before the plates were set. Collards were cheap and grew in nearly every backyard garden, but when simmered with a ham hock, they turned from ordinary greens into something soulful. The pot bubbled for hours, spreading the smoky smell of cured meat through small kitchens and open windows. People joked that you could smell it halfway down the block, and they were right. The liquid, known lovingly as potlikker, was prized just as much as the greens themselves, rich, salty, and full of nutrients. Some soaked it up with cornbread, others drank it straight. Collards with ham hocks were not just food, they were fellowship. They told a story of roots, community, and patience, showing that even hardship could taste like home when cooked with care and faith. Sweet potato biscuits were soft, golden clouds of comfort baked right into the heart of wartime kitchens. When sugar was scarce, families leaned on the natural sweetness of homegrown sweet potatoes. Mashed and mixed into biscuit dough, they baked up tender and fragrant, filling the house with the smell of cinnamon, smoke, and love. They were served with butter if you had it, syrup if you were lucky, or just warm from the oven if not. Each bite carried a quiet message. Life might be hard, but there was still room for sweetness. These biscuits graced church suppers, family gatherings, and small kitchen tables alike. They were food for the soul, the kind of treat that reminded families that hope was something you could taste. The golden crust flaked beneath the fingertips, and the soft center melted on the tongue like memory. Grandmothers often baked them on Sundays, saving one pan for the next morning's breakfast. Even the leftovers, if any, were treasures wrapped in cloth. They told a story of endurance sweetened by faith, of women who made miracles with nothing more than flour, fire, and heart. In those biscuits lived the taste of love passed down through generations. Fried cornbread, sometimes called hot water bread, was the quick fix when flour ran low and hunger ran high. A handful of cornmeal, a pinch of salt, and a splash of boiling water. That was all it took. The batter hit the skillet with a hiss, puffing up into golden patties that crackled at the edges. Crisp outside and tender inside, they were eaten with greens, beans, or just on their own. It was the kind of bread that came together fast and filled every stomach around the table. Folks joked that hot water bread was born out of stubbornness because no shortage could stop people from making something warm to eat. It was humble, yes, but it held pride, flavor, and the kind of history that keeps families strong even when times are lean. The sound of it frying filled the room with life, and the smell carried straight to the porch. Children would watch, waiting for the first piece to cool, their mouths watering. Some cooks added a touch of bacon grease for richness, others fried them plain, relying on the corn's sweetness alone. Each patty was a small victory, a promise that even the simplest meal could feel whole when shared with love. Pinto bean cakes were genius in their simplicity. Leftover beans from last night's pot were mashed, mixed with flour and onions, and fried until golden brown. What had started as scraps became something new, something delicious. The cakes were crisp at the edges and soft in the center, hearty enough to stand on their own or to sit beside rice or greens. It was a meal made by hands that refused to waste, by people who understood that nothing in the kitchen should ever be thrown away. The scent of frying bean cakes was homely and warm, a small reward for hard work. Each bite tasted of thrift, resourcefulness, and quiet pride. It was proof that survival could be creative, and that good cooking never depended on wealth, only wisdom. The sound of the pan crackling was the sound of resilience itself. A sprinkle of salt, a turn of the spatula, and the world felt right again. Served with hot sauce or ketchup, they turned into a feast from the plainest of ingredients. Bean cakes taught children early on that waste was not an option, and that love could be fried up right alongside supper. Turnip greens and rice were food for the weary but nourishment for the strong. The greens, bitter on their own, mellowed into flavor when boiled down with a little fat or bone. The rice soaked up everything, turning the dish into something both filling and healing. It was simple, yes, but it carried the essence of home, steam, spice, and the rhythm of spoons against bowls. Sometimes families added bits of salt pork or even a splash of vinegar to wake up the taste. Most times, though, it was just greens and rice, humble and whole. It fed everyone, from the field hand to the school child, giving strength for another day. In kitchens lit by single bulbs and hope, this meal was not just eaten. It was shared, savored, and remembered. The steam rose from the pot like a prayer, curling in the air as laughter filled the room. It was a dish that brought silence to hunger and calm to the hardest of hearts. Turnip greens and rice were proof that nourishment did not need luxury, just patience, warmth, and a steady hand to stir the pot. Cabbage and potatoes with fatback was the kind of dinner that came from both patience and pride. It started with simple ingredients, just a head of cabbage, a few potatoes, and a piece of salted pork. But it ended up tasting like something far grander. The fatback sizzled first in the pan, releasing its smoky aroma that filled the house and made stomachs growl. Then came the cabbage and potatoes, frying and steaming together until tender and glistening. The salty richness from the pork flavored every bite, turning two humble vegetables into a full meal. It was a one-pan supper that needed no extras, no fancy seasoning, just time and care. Families cooked it when payday was still far away, yet it always brought a sense of comfort. This was food that worked hard to remind people they were still home, still together, and still able to make something beautiful from what little they had. Liver and onions was the meal that divided the table. Some loved it, others only learned to. Still, it was a staple for families who knew the value of nourishment over preference. Liver was cheap, packed with iron, and one of the few meats available when rationing made everything else scarce. Mothers dredged the slices in flour, dropped them into sizzling pans, and topped them with sweet caramelized onions to soften the flavor. The scent was sharp and earthy, but it meant dinner was near. Children might scrunch their noses, but their parents knew this meal kept them strong. Liver and onions was not a luxury. It was resilience on a plate. It taught people that food could heal, even when it did not delight. And somehow, between the onion's sweetness and the liver's strength, the bitterness of hard times always faded by the last bite. Families passed down their own small tricks, soaking the liver in milk, adding a splash of vinegar or a touch of sugar to the onions. Each variation told a story of trying to make hardship taste a little softer. The clinking of forks and quiet hum of appreciation at the table made it clear that this meal, plain as it was, fed more than just bodies. It fed endurance. Fried bologna sandwiches were the working family's delicacy, simple yet unforgettable. A slice of bologna hit the skillet with a pop, curling up at the edges as it browned. Some folks cut a small X in the center to keep it flat, while others let it bubble proudly in the middle. The smell was savory, smoky, and enough to draw kids from every corner of the house. Served between two slices of white bread with mustard or mayonnaise, it became a warm, satisfying meal. It was the kind of sandwich you could make in minutes after a long day, but it tasted like something far more special. In neighborhoods across the South and city blocks up north, this quick bite became a comfort food that never really left. It was proof that nostalgia could be fried right into a pan and served up with pride. Many added cheese when payday came or a fried egg for extra richness, but even plain, it hit the spot every time. The first bite was always hot and salty, the bread soft and buttery at the edges. It was cheap, sure, but it tasted like victory at the end of a long week. That sizzle in the pan sounded like hope, fast, familiar, and enough to make a whole family smile. Black-eyed peas with cornbread was a meal built on tradition, luck, and endurance. These tiny beans were cheap but mighty, packed with protein and comfort. Simmered with bits of onion, fatback, or ham bone, they turned into something far richer than their humble ingredients suggested. The cornbread, golden and crisp at the edges, was perfect for soaking up the flavorful juices at the bottom of the bowl. It was the taste of the South, earthy, smoky, and deeply rooted in memory. Families made it at the start of a new year for good fortune, but for many, it was a year-round staple. No matter the day, black-eyed peas and cornbread meant there was still food, still hope, still a table worth gathering around. The pot would bubble for hours, filling homes with the smell of comfort and continuity. Each bowl carried the lessons of generations, of patience, of faith, and of gratitude for what the earth gave. Even when times were thin, this simple combination could make a family feel rich. Eating it was never just about hunger. It was a quiet promise that tomorrow would bring enough. Okra and tomato stew was what summer gardens were made for. A handful of fresh okra, a few ripe tomatoes, and a single onion could fill a whole pot with color and flavor. As the stew simmered, the vegetables broke down into a thick, hearty blend that clung to every spoonful. Some added a little corn or bacon grease for extra body, while others kept it simple and clean. The aroma was bright, tangy, and familiar, the scent of sunshine and soil mixed together. Served over rice or cornbread, it brought warmth even on the hottest days. Okra and tomato stew was proof that when the garden gave, a good cook could feed everyone. The sound of bubbling pots filled porches where families cooled off from long days in the field. It was a meal made with the rhythm of life itself, slow, patient, and rooted in the earth. Even children who wrinkled their noses at okra ended up cleaning their plates once they tasted the soft, rich stew. It was both sustenance and memory, carrying the taste of family gardens, of hands stained with soil and hearts full of pride. In every spoonful was the legacy of those who grew what they ate and made miracles from the ground beneath their feet. Boiled cabbage and salted fish was a meal that spoke of coastlines and hard work. Salted fish, preserved to last through rationing, was soaked and boiled until tender, its salt mellowed but its flavor strong. The cabbage cooked alongside, soaking up the richness of the fish while releasing its own sweetness. The smell was unmistakable, the kind that lingered long after the plates were cleared. Some served it with rice or cornbread to stretch it further. It was humble, yes, but satisfying. A reminder of how deeply the sea and land fed one another. Even far from the coast, families held on to this dish, a piece of history served steaming in a single pot. It carried the spirit of fishermen, mothers, and laborers who worked with what the earth and ocean allowed. The salt clung to the air like a memory of the sea, even for those who had never seen it. This was food that told stories, of storms survived, of nets mended, of tables where gratitude was the main course. Every bite carried the taste of resilience, a flavor that outlasted hardship and traveled through generations untouched. Grease gravy rice was what people cooked when they refused to let anything go to waste. When breakfast meats were done frying, the leftover grease became treasure. A spoon of flour went in first, sizzling and popping until it turned golden. Then milk or water got poured in, slow and steady, until it thickened into smooth gravy. That hot gravy poured over white rice made something out of nearly nothing. It was salty, creamy, and smoky all at once. The smell filled the house and the taste filled the stomach. Parents called it breakfast, but it could carry a family through an entire day. It came from kitchens that knew survival like a second language, where flavor was earned from thrift and patience. Kids grew up thinking it was comfort food, not knowing it was born from rationing and struggle. Grease gravy rice was more than a recipe. It was a declaration that no meal was too small to matter. Every bite was a promise that the family would eat, even when times were lean. It was humble food that carried pride on a spoon. Neckbone stew was a dish that came from both poverty and genius. In kitchens that owned more will than wealth, neck bones were slow simmered until the meat slipped right off and blended with the broth like silk. The smell alone carried across yards, filling homes with warmth that no coin could buy. It was a stew that turned waste into nourishment, where each bone told a story of patience and pride. Families often cooked it on weekends when they had a little time and a lot of mouths to feed. A few onions, a pinch of salt, and maybe a carrot or two if luck allowed. Nothing fancy, yet everything that mattered. The magic was in the time it took, not the price of the ingredients. Children grew up waiting for that bubbling pot, knowing it meant everyone would eat well that night. The first spoonful always felt like a reward, the kind that only hard work and faith could earn. Neckbone stew was more than a meal. It was a symbol of how far resourcefulness could stretch. It was living proof that love could turn even the humblest scrap into a feast worth remembering. Churned milk soup was what you made when you had finished making butter and still needed a meal. That leftover buttermilk became the base for a tangy, hearty soup that could feed a family from a single pot. It was mixed with cornmeal, herbs, and whatever vegetables were on hand, then simmered until it thickened like velvet. The smell was sharp but cozy, filling the kitchen with warmth and familiarity. Some families dropped bits of bread into the bowl, letting it soak up the flavor. It was simple food, born from old farm routines and frugal wisdom. Churned milk soup taught that nothing should ever be wasted. not even the scraps of a good day's work. It soothed hunger and reminded everyone that comfort could come from the most ordinary things. With each spoonful, it carried the echo of laughter and work from generations before. Hoppin' John was more than food. It was a wish whispered into every new year and a memory of old fields and family prayers. Made from black-eyed peas, rice, and a scrap of salted pork, it carried a meaning far greater than its humble parts. Each bowl symbolized luck, wealth, and resilience, a quiet hope for better days ahead. Born on plantations where ingredients were scarce, Hoppin' John turned survival into tradition. The peas represented coins, the rice abundance, and the pork, the flavor of prosperity. It became a holiday staple across generations, cooked in cast-iron pots and served with greens on the side. The slow simmer filled homes with comfort, while the taste spoke of endurance. People didn't just eat Hoppin' John, they believed in it. It was a way to honor ancestors who worked the land and still found joy in sharing a simple meal. Every spoonful connected past to present, hardship to hope. In the rhythm of the South, Hoppin' John remains a dish that keeps faith alive, proving that luck can be cooked, shared, and passed down like love itself. Soot biscuits were the kind of food you learned to trust when the fire was all you had. They were baked in soot-covered Dutch ovens, set right into the coals until the smell of toasted flour filled the air. The outsides came out black and charred, but inside they were soft, warm, and sweet from the faint taste of smoke. You brushed off the ash and split them open, steam rising like a small blessing. They were eaten with syrup, molasses, or even gravy if the morning allowed it. Families traveling, camping, or working the land knew this trick well. It was food that came straight from the earth and fire, raw and honest. Soot biscuits did not look like much, but they carried pride. They were proof that comfort could come from the simplest effort, that even ashes could feed the body and soothe the soul. The smell lingered on your hands and clothes, a reminder that good things sometimes came wrapped in smoke. Each bite tasted like work and gratitude, the flavor of survival baked in real flame. Pan-fried gizzards were the kind of meal that proved patience was as important as any spice. Tough and chewy at first, these scraps of poultry were transformed through slow cleaning, seasoning, and frying into golden bites of pride. A bowl of seasoned flour, a splash of buttermilk, and a hot cast-iron skillet were all it took to turn what most people ignored into something worth gathering for. The gizzards hissed in oil until they were crisp on the outside and tender within, each one carrying the smoky taste of hard work and heart. Families would pile them high on paper towels, watching the steam rise like a promise that dinner was ready. Every batch felt earned, every crunch a reminder that flavor came from care, not wealth. Children gnawed at the edges, soaking the last bits in hot sauce, while elders nodded in approval. Pan-fried gizzards were food that spoke of resourcefulness, a celebration of making something special from nothing. They filled kitchens with the sound of sizzling survival, the scent of seasoning that lingered long after the plates were empty. In every bite was proof that thrift could taste like triumph. Watermelon rind hash was a dish that proved nothing in a southern kitchen ever truly went to waste. After the sweet red fruit was eaten down to its pale skin, the green rinds were peeled, diced, and saved for the next meal. They were boiled until soft, then tossed into a skillet with onions, peppers, and a pinch of spice. What came out of that pan was golden and glistening, sweet with a hint of salt, smelling faintly of summer rain and backyard laughter. The rind soaked up flavor like memory itself, turning something forgotten into something worth savoring. Families served it with cornbread or rice, sometimes even cold the next morning with eggs. It filled bellies when money was short and reminded everyone that resourcefulness could taste as good as plenty. The sizzle in the skillet sounded like hope, sharp and quick, the sign that something good was about to happen. Watermelon rind hash was not just food, it was gratitude on a plate. Every bite told the story of people who refused to waste even the smallest blessing. It was sweet, it was humble, and it carried the quiet genius of survival, transforming scraps into a celebration that no one ever forgot. cowpea soup simmered like a prayer whispered over a fire. The pot would start with water, a scoop of dried field peas, and maybe a scrap of salted meat if the week had been kind. Onions and garlic joined in, releasing their scent as the broth thickened into something golden and strong. The cowpeas, small and sturdy, softened slowly, their flavor deepening with every hour. This wasn't fast food, it was patient food, built on rhythm and time. Families made it during harvest, when work was hard and hands needed warmth. It was ladled into tin bowls and passed around without ceremony, each bite grounding you in gratitude. Sometimes cornbread floated on top like an offering, soaking up the last drops of broth. The soup tasted of earth and labor, of simple things done well. Cowpea soup was both meal and memory, tying together generations who had learned how to make plenty out of little. It was food for body and spirit alike, humble but whole, strong but soothing. Even now, its scent carries the same promise, that comfort comes from what you give, not what you have. Hominy pancakes were another clever way families stretched resources into filling meals. Hominy, boiled corn kernels treated with lye, was folded into simple flour batter and fried on a hot griddle until crisp on the edges. The result was a pancake that was hearty, chewy, and rich in flavor. Families leaned on this dish because hominy was inexpensive, filling, and often available in bulk. These pancakes were served plain or topped with syrup, molasses, or even just butter when sugar was scarce. Children enjoyed the slightly nutty texture, while adults appreciated that it carried them through long hours of work. Hominy pancakes were tied to heritage too, with roots reaching back to Native American food traditions that influenced Southern cooking. They were a reminder of resilience and cultural continuity, showing how simple staples could be reinvented to meet new needs. Hominy pancakes filled stomachs, but they also filled mornings with the comfort of tradition and the creativity of making do. Corncob jelly was one of those miracles that made people smile at their own cleverness. When the corn was shucked and the cobs left behind, no one dared to throw them out. Those bare cobs went into a big pot of water, boiled until the water turned golden and sweet-smelling. Sugar and a little lemon juice got added next, then everything was strained until the liquid gleamed like honey. The result was a jelly that tasted faintly of corn, syrupy and light, the perfect spread for biscuits or toast. People used it when fruit was scarce, and it carried a quiet pride that came from turning scraps into sweetness. Grandparents remembered it from their childhood, when waste was not an option and imagination ruled the kitchen. Corncob jelly was proof that flavor could be coaxed out of what others might ignore. It was soft, shining, and made with patience. Those who tasted it never forgot that feeling of abundance born from scarcity. Each spoonful told the story of hands that worked hard, saved everything, and still found time to make something beautiful. Okra fritters with corn silk were the kind of kitchen magic that only came from necessity and imagination. In the long summer months, when the fields were full and money was not, people used every part of what they harvested. The corn silk that clung to the ears was not thrown away, but saved and shredded, added into batter alongside chopped okra, flour, and a splash of milk or water. When dropped into hot oil, the fritters puffed and crackled, their edges turning golden and crisp. The smell was something you could follow from down the road. Warm, nutty, and sweet with that faint scent of corn. Each bite was crunchy on the outside and tender in the middle, with little strings of corn silk that gave it texture and charm. They were served with syrup or vinegar, depending on what the family had, eaten right out of the pan when patience ran out. Okra fritters with corn silk were food born from care and cleverness, proof that waste had no place in a humble kitchen. Every family had its own version, passed quietly between generations, carrying the taste of late afternoons, hard work, and simple joy. They were poverty's poetry, fried into something worth remembering. Navy bean soup with crackers was the kind of meal that made hard days softer. Dried beans soaked overnight, swelling with promise before simmering all afternoon with salt pork, onions, and a bay leaf if one was handy. The broth grew thick and creamy, wrapping around each bean like a hug. Crackers crumbled on top added a bit of crunch, stretching the soup even further. It was warm, filling, and dependable, the kind of dish that asked for little and gave a lot. During wartime, when rations ran thin, this soup showed that patience and creativity could still fill every bowl. It was food for the soul, simple and steadfast, keeping families strong when the world outside felt uncertain. The scent of simmering beans filled homes like a promise that hunger would not win that day. It was a dish that carried people through storms, through shortages, through loss. Even in silence, as spoons dipped and bowls emptied, there was comfort. It was not luxury. It was survival made tender. Corncob jelly turned what most people threw away into a shimmering golden spread that brightened plain breads and biscuits. After kernels were cut from the cob for other uses, the remaining cores were boiled for a long time to draw out natural starch and pectin. The liquid was strained, sweetened with a modest amount of sugar or honey when available, and cooked again until it thickened into a soft jelly with a delicate corn flavor. Enslaved cooks perfected this transformation, ensuring nothing went to waste and every scrap contributed to nourishment. Long after emancipation, rural homesteaders and Depression-era families embraced corncob jelly as a thrifty delicacy, and it still appears at Southern craft fairs and heritage festivals. The gentle sweetness and faintly toasted aroma offer a taste of memory and ingenuity. Corncob jelly proves that culinary creativity can turn the most humble remnants of the harvest into something beautiful, a spread that honors the perseverance of those who found flavor and comfort in the very parts of the plant others overlooked. Hand-pulled taffy candy brought winter nights alive with laughter and sticky hands. Families boiled sorghum or cane syrup with sugar until it reached the perfect glossy stage, then poured the hot mixture onto buttered slabs to cool slightly. Children and adults alike greased their palms and began the rhythmic pulling, stretching the warm candy until it turned light and airy. The kitchen filled with the sweet smell of caramel as ropes of taffy were twisted and cut into bite-sized pieces. It was as much about the gathering as the candy, a shared activity that warmed cold evenings and strengthened family ties. Neighbors might stop by to help, turning the process into a spontaneous party where stories and jokes flowed as freely as the sugary strands. Store-bought sweets eventually replaced the long, careful ritual, but the memory of shining taffy and joyful pulling remains vivid for those who once stood in the glow of a winter stove and felt the magic of homemade candy. Homemade cornmeal pancakes for supper were another way families stretched basic ingredients into a filling meal. Flour, cornmeal, lard, and milk came together in a batter that fried into golden cakes on a hot skillet. My grandmother served them stacked, drizzled with syrup if any was available, or eaten plain with butter when syrup was gone. The pancakes were fluffy yet hearty, giving enough energy to hold a family until morning. They cost next to nothing but fed many, which was exactly what mattered most. Children loved the sweetness when syrup was added, while adults appreciated the sheer substance of the cakes. In the 1960s, cornmeal pancakes were a staple when meat was scarce, turning humble ingredients into something warm and reliable. It was comfort food born of necessity, one of those meals that never left memory even as times changed. Homemade cornmeal pancakes carried the spirit of thrift, filling plates with love and survival. Fried green tomatoes were the kind of treat that made ordinary days feel like celebration. Slices of firm, unripe tomatoes were dipped in cornmeal, sizzled golden in hot oil, and served crisp enough to crunch between your teeth. The first bite was always a surprise, tart, salty, and satisfying. Grandparents made them when gardens overflowed and nothing could go to waste. It was a dish born out of resourcefulness and love, not recipes. The oil popped and spat as they cooked, filling the kitchen with a smell that pulled everyone closer. You'd find them on the side of breakfast plates or stacked in sandwiches, proof that creativity always finds a way to feed you. Even today, their tangy bite feels like a small rebellion against blandness, a reminder that the best things in life are fried just right. Watermelon rind stew reflects the creativity and endurance of people forced to survive on the edges of the plantation food system. The sweet red fruit was usually reserved for those in the owner's household, But the pale green rind, often thrown away, became a valuable ingredient for the enslaved cooks who transformed scraps into nourishment. Strips of rind were simmered slowly with onions, garden herbs, and whatever seasoning could be gathered or traded, creating a mellow broth rich in minerals and gentle sweetness. This practice traveled forward in time, inspiring the pickled watermelon rind that remains a hallmark of Southern home kitchens today. The dish is more than a recipe. It is a record of resilience, showing how African culinary knowledge turned waste into sustenance and flavor. In modern celebrations of African American foodways, watermelon rind pickles and stews continue to honor those who preserved health and dignity through skilled cooking even when denied basic freedom. Buttermilk cornbread baked in cast iron anchored countless suppers with its golden crust and tangy bite. The heavy skillet, seasoned from years of use, gave the bread a flavor impossible to match in a modern pan. Families stirred cornmeal with fresh buttermilk, a little lard, and a pinch of salt, then listened for the satisfying hiss as the batter hit hot iron. The result was a loaf both crisp at the edges and tender inside, perfect for soaking up potlikker from simmered greens or for eating plain with a drizzle of cane syrup. Grandmothers often taught their grandchildren to test the heat of the skillet by flicking in a few drops of water, a small ritual that connected generations. On Sundays after church, the scent of baking cornbread drifted through neighborhoods, promising a meal that united family and friends. Today, prepackaged mixes and quick breads have replaced the slow, careful method that once defined African American kitchens, and the art of true cast-iron cornbread grows rarer with each passing year. Fried rice with scrambled egg was the kind of supper that could be made out of almost nothing but still managed to feel hearty. Leftover rice was saved from the night before, reheated in a skillet with a little oil or lard, and then combined with scrambled egg to add richness. My grandmother would sometimes add chopped onion or green pepper if the garden allowed, but the dish stood strong even without extras. The rice fried up golden, the egg binding it together into something more than scraps. A dash of salt and pepper finished it, though hot sauce often appeared at the table too. What amazed me was how it transformed simple grains into a filling plate that stretched across a family without breaking the budget. The meal carried warmth and thrift in equal measure, reminding everyone that dinner did not need meat to be satisfying. In the 1960s, fried rice with scrambled egg was not fancy, but it was dependable, the kind of dish that fed children and adults alike with just enough to keep spirits steady. Hoppin' John was the heartbeat of New Year's morning and every day that needed a little hope. Black-eyed peas simmered with rice and a hint of smoked meat turned into more than just a meal. It became a blessing. Grandparents swore by it, saying a bowl on the first day of the year would bring luck, health, and enough to last. The peas symbolized coins, the rice meant abundance, and every spoonful felt like a promise whispered between generations. You could smell the onions frying before the pot even started, the kind of smell that felt like homecoming. This dish came out of history, from the low-country kitchens of the South, and found its way into hearts across America. Even when times were thin, Hoppin' John stayed thick, filling bellies and spirits alike. It wasn't a rich person's dish. It was the people's dish, one that carried laughter, prayer, and endurance in equal measure. Today, even if you only make it once a year, you can feel that same wish for good fortune echo through every bite. Wild plum chutney offered a burst of tart sweetness when sugar was scarce and fruit trees grew untended along plantation edges. Gatherers picked the small, deeply colored plums at peak ripeness and simmered them slowly with a little honey or molasses when available, along with wild herbs for spice. The result was a tangy preserve that enlivened cornbread, salted meats, or simple porridge, providing vitamins and variety in otherwise plain meals. This method of combining fruit with savory seasonings echoed West African chutneys and relishes, demonstrating a culinary bridge between continents. After freedom, African American home cooks continued to prize wild plums for jellies and sauces, and many Southern families still make small-batch plum preserves each summer. The enduring appeal of wild plum chutney lies in its ability to turn overlooked fruit into a bright condiment that brightens any table. It stands as a flavorful link between survival cooking and the rich tapestry of modern Southern preserves that celebrate both heritage and the gifts of the wild landscape. Okra gumbo with fresh crab told the story of low-country waters and West African roots in every bowl. Thickened by the natural mucilage of okra and deepened with a slow-simmered stock, the stew held blue crab, onions, bell peppers, and fragrant spices that reflected both coastal bounty and ancestral memory. Fishermen brought the catch of the day to markets where cooks bargained for the sweetest crab meat, while home gardeners plucked tender okra pods from vines that thrived in humid summers. The gumbo pot became a gathering place where family and neighbors stood around sharing stories as the aroma of seafood and spice filled the air. Served over rice, each spoonful carried the taste of tides, soil, and a heritage that stretched back across the Atlantic. In modern times, many turned to faster recipes and frozen ingredients, losing the patient layering of flavor that once defined this dish. Yet for those who remember, nothing matches the soulful depth of a true okra gumbo made with freshly caught crab. Ham bone soup with vegetables was one of those meals where one piece of meat flavored an entire pot. A single ham bone, stripped of most of its meat, simmered for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes until the broth turned rich and smoky. My grandmother would add beans or greens if she had them, letting the flavors meld into something far more substantial than the ingredients suggested. Families gathered around steaming bowls, dipping bread into the broth and savoring the flavor the bone had left behind. It was frugal cooking at its finest, taking scraps and stretching them into nourishment. The soup fed many mouths, warmed cold nights, and made do with what was available. In the 1960s, when meat was costly, a ham bone could be the centerpiece of dinner, proving that thrift and patience could coax flavor out of nearly anything. Ham bone soup with vegetables carried both practicality and comfort in every ladleful. Cornbread dressing was the kind of side dish that never stayed on the side. It was the soul of Sunday dinners and holiday tables, baked golden and rich with sage, onions, and broth. Grandparents made it from scratch, crumbling day-old cornbread by hand and stirring in whatever they had, sometimes bits of chicken, sometimes just love. The smell alone could make you stop mid-step and breathe it in. It was dense yet soft, buttery but never heavy, and it always seemed to stretch just far enough to feed one more plate. In a time when nothing was wasted, this dish was how people turned leftovers into luxury. Every scoop came with the memory of crowded kitchens and laughter spilling from one room to the next. It was more than food. It was ceremony, care, and continuity baked into one pan. Cornbread dressing held families together long before anyone called it tradition. Roasted chestnuts carried warmth and nourishment through the cold months when plantation rations were meager and gardens lay dormant. Enslaved families foraged chestnut trees that grew wild in the surrounding woods, gathering the smooth brown nuts and roasting them in hearth ashes or iron skillets until their shells cracked and the sweet flesh softened. The nuts' high energy content and natural sweetness made it an important source of calories and comfort, especially during long winter evenings. Roasted chestnuts became part of a wider African American food tradition, appearing in holiday celebrations and roadside markets after emancipation. Their gentle flavor paired well with cornmeal breads and simple stews, and many families passed down techniques for roasting and storing them long after the plantation era ended. Today, roasted chestnuts sold at winter festivals and city street corners carry echoes of that history, reminding us that what began as a survival practice also nurtured community and seasonal ritual for generations who transformed hardship into enduring culture. Pickled watermelon rind turned summer scraps into something bright and memorable when waste was never an option. Families peeled the green rinds from sweet watermelons, cut them into strips, and simmered them in a brine of vinegar, sugar, and warm spices until the pieces turned translucent and tender. The finished pickles carried a gentle sweetness with a tart kick that balanced fried fish or smoky barbecued pork. Children often helped pack the jars, laughing as the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and clove. These jars lined pantry shelves and cooled in cellars, ready to brighten winter meals with a taste of summer. For many households, this thrifty condiment was a sign of careful planning and pride in making every harvest last. Today, Few people bother to save the rinds, and the recipe hides in old notebooks and fading memories. Yet those who remember speak of the surprising pleasure of that sweet, sour crunch beside a plate of fried catfish. Which of these 1940s dinners would you bring back? Comment on your favorite, like the video, and subscribe to keep the spirit of survival cooking alive.